I work in property management, mostly dealing with rental properties, fixing leases, handling maintenance requests, making sure tenants pay on time. It's not glamorous, but it's stable, and it keeps me busy. The thing about this job is that I have access to a lot of personal information: where people live, how long they've lived there, their phone numbers, sometimes even where they work. I don't abuse it, of course, but I've always been aware of how dangerous it could be in the wrong hands. I live alone in a condo on the edge of town. It's not much, but it's mine. I like my routines. I go to the gym after work. I grab the same coffee in the morning from the little shop down the street, and I walk the same path home every evening. I like knowing what to expect. I think that's why what happened to me hit so hard. It took everything I knew, every comfort I had, and shattered it into something unrecognizable. It started with small things, the feeling of being watched. At first, I chalked it up to paranoia. I'd had a rough few weeks, tenants complaining about broken appliances, a water leak in one of the older buildings I managed, a dispute between two neighbors that turned nasty. Stress can mess with your head. But then, I started noticing more tangible things. My front door would be unlocked when I came home, even though I knew I had locked it. A light in my apartment would be on when I was sure I had turned it off. My mail would be disturbed, slightly out of order, like someone had sifted through it and hastily shoved it back. I told myself I was being forgetful. Maybe I had left the door unlocked. Maybe I had left the light on. But then something happened that I couldn't explain away. One evening, I came home to find my closet door open. I never leave it open, ever. I keep it slightly jammed shut because it's old and the hinges are off kilter. For it to be open meant someone had pulled it. I stood there staring at it for what felt like an eternity. My first thought was that maybe maintenance had come in for something and left it open, but I hadn't submitted any requests. And why would they have any reason to go into my closet? I checked the whole apartment that night, under the bed, behind the shower curtain, inside every cabinet. Nothing. No one. But I barely slept. I kept listening for sounds, waiting for movement that never came. Then came the notes. The first one was in my mailbox. A single slip of paper, no envelope, no name. Just 6 words written in uneven, jagged letters. I like watching you come home. My stomach dropped. I looked around, trying to see if anyone was nearby, but the street was empty. I took the note inside, stared at it for a long time, and finally convinced myself it was a prank. Maybe a tenant who was upset about a lease renewal or a rent increase trying to mess with me. I threw it away and tried to forget about it. The second note was on my windshield a week later. I know when you're alone. That was the night I called the police. An officer came out, took a report, and told me to be careful. That was it. They didn't have much to go on. I asked about security cameras, but my building didn't have any. The officer suggested I get a camera for my door and keep my phone close. So I did. I bought a small security camera and mounted it outside my door. I set up motion alerts and tried to go back to normal. But normal was gone. The next time, the note wasn't left for me to find. It was placed inside my apartment. I found it on my kitchen counter when I came home from work. You look so peaceful, when you sleep. I felt like my lungs had collapsed. Someone had been inside. Someone had been watching me. I checked the door, still locked. The windows, still latched. There was no sign of forced entry, but someone had been there. I grabbed my phone and called the police again. This time, they took it more seriously. They checked for fingerprints, but found nothing useful. They asked if I had any enemies. I told them no. I had no exes who would do this, no major disputes with anyone. Just tenants. And none of them seemed like the type to pull something like this. I stayed with a friend for a few days. When I came back, I checked the security footage, and that's when I saw him. A man, standing at my door in the middle of the night, not trying to get in, just standing there. For almost an hour, he never moved, never knocked, just stood there, staring at my door. Then, at some point, he turned his head slightly, like he knew the camera was there, and he smiled. I left my apartment that night and never went back. I had the locks changed, packed my things, and broke my lease. The police never found him. They never figured out how he got in. But I still think about him. I still think about the way he stood there, patient and silent, like he had all the time in the world. And sometimes, when I walk home at night, I feel the weight of unseen eyes, watching, waiting. I work nights at a 24-hour gas station off the highway. It's not a great job, but it's quiet, and I don't have to deal with too many people. Most of the time, it's just truckers stopping for gas, the occasional late-night road tripper, and the same handful of regulars, loners, insomniacs, people who don't have anywhere else to be. I've always been careful, though. My boss drilled it into my head. Never leave the counter after dark, unless you have to. Always lock the side door, and if anything feels off, trust your gut. I took that seriously. Maybe I should have taken it even more seriously. It started about a month ago, the first time I noticed him. He was just standing outside, barely visible at the edge of the parking lot, right where the gas station's lights faded into the dark. I wouldn't have even seen him if I hadn't been looking up at the security monitor. He wasn't pumping gas. He wasn't walking toward the store. He was just standing there, staring. I glanced down for maybe half a second, just to check the register screen, and when I looked back at the monitor, he was gone. I stepped outside and looked around. The lot was empty except for a single truck parked by the air pump. The driver was inside, flipping through his phone. I asked if he'd seen anyone, but he just shook his head. I told myself it was nothing, a trick of the lights, my imagination. But then it happened again, and again. Every few nights, I'd catch a glimpse of him, never moving, never coming closer, just standing at the edge of the light, watching. It was always the same spot. I started dreading my shifts, checking the monitors constantly, scanning the parking lot through the smudged glass doors. Then, last week, I made a mistake. I left the counter. It was just for a second. A shelf of chips had tipped over near the back of the store, and I didn't want my manager breathing down my neck about it. I stepped out from behind the counter, walked about 10 feet, and started picking up the bags. When I turned around, he was inside. He stood just past the threshold, the door slowly swinging shut behind him. He was tall gaunt, wearing a hood pulled low over his face. I couldn't see his eyes, but I could feel them on me. My chest tightened so hard I could barely breathe. "Can I help you?" My voice barely came out. He didn't say anything. He just stood there. Every instinct in me screamed to run, but my feet were frozen. My brain scrambled for something, anything, to do. Then he moved. Not toward me, toward the counter. He walked behind it. He shouldn't have been able to. I always locked the little swinging door that led back there, but he just pushed through it, like it wasn't even latched. I wanted to run, to bolt for the door, but my body refused to cooperate. I watched, helpless, as he reached under the counter, where we keep the register, the cigarettes, the emergency panic button. He didn't touch any of those things. Instead, he reached deeper into the narrow space between the cabinet and the wall, and he pulled something out. A key. A single silver key. My key. The spare to my apartment. The one I kept taped under the counter just in case. My stomach flipped inside out. He held it up for me to see, turning it over in his fingers like he was admiring it. Then, without a word, he slipped it into his pocket, turned, and walked out the door. I quit that night, left everything behind, my job, my apartment, all of it. I don't know how he got that key. I don't know how long he'd been waiting to take it, and I don't want to find out. All I know is, some nights, I wake up in a cold sweat, positive that I heard my doorknob rattle. I never wanted to move back to my childhood home, but life has a way of pushing you into places you thought you'd left behind. After my father passed, my mother couldn't keep up with the house on her own, and with my job allowing me to work remotely, it only made sense that I return. It wasn't ideal, but it was temporary. Or so I told myself. The house was old, built in the 1920s, and full of the kind of creaks and groans that come with age. I had spent my childhood convinced it was haunted, but adulthood and logic had done away with those fears. That is, until I started hearing the knocking. It always came at the same time, 3:12 a.m. The first time, I woke up disoriented, unsure if I had dreamed it. A slow, rhythmic knocking, not at the front door, not at the windows. It came from inside the walls. I told myself it was pipes settling, the house shifting, normal old house sounds. But the next night, it happened again, same time. Same steady knock, knock, knock. I pressed my ear to the wall, heart pounding. It sounded like it was coming from inside my bedroom wall, just behind my bed. By the third night, I was done pretending it was nothing. I moved my bed away from the wall, determined to find the source. I knocked on the wall myself, expecting it to sound solid. It didn't. The sound was hollow. My childhood home had no secret rooms, no hidden crawl spaces, or so I had thought. But as I ran my hands along the wall, I felt it, an uneven seam, nearly imperceptible. My pulse quickened. I pressed harder, and suddenly a panel shifted inward with a soft click. Behind it was a narrow passageway, pitch black, the air inside thick with dust and something else, something rotten, a smell that turned my stomach. I should have closed it, nailed it shut, and pretended I had never found it. But Something in me needed to know, needed to see. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and stepped inside. The passage was tight, barely wide enough for me to squeeze through. The walls were lined with old, peeling wallpaper, the floor covered in a thin layer of dust that suggested no one had been inside for years. But then I saw them. Footprints. Not old ones. Fresh ones. Leading deeper into the darkness. I swallowed hard, my breath coming in shallow gasps. My logical mind screamed at me to turn around, to get out. But my legs carried me forward, following the prints down the narrow corridor until I reached a small wooden door. I hesitated only for a moment before pushing it open. Inside was a tiny, windowless room. The smell was overpowering now, and as my flashlight swept over the walls, I felt the bile rise in my throat. The walls were covered in photographs, hundreds of them, pictures of me, as a child, as a teenager, as an adult. Some were old, ones I recognized from family albums, but others were recent, taken from outside the house, from my bedroom window. And then I saw it. A small, tattered mattress in the corner, a pile of clothes, a half-eaten plate of food, the crumbs still fresh. Someone had been living here, watching me. The knocking wasn't the house settling. It wasn't the pipes. It was them. I ran. I don't remember getting out of the passageway. Don't remember how I made it back to my room, but I locked the door behind me and didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The police found no one inside when they arrived the next morning, but they found signs, discarded food, a still warm blanket, and a small handwritten note left on the mattress. It read, "I've missed you." I've always been the kind of person who enjoys being alone. It's not that I dislike people. I just prefer my own company. That's part of the reason I took a job as a night security guard. It was easy work, quiet, and let me get paid for essentially just staying awake. The building I watched over was an old office complex that had mostly emptied out over the years. Only a few businesses still rented space inside. A law office, a dentist, and a small publishing company. But they were all long gone by the time my shift started at 10 p.m. My job was simple. Walk the halls a few times per night, check the security cameras, and make sure the doors were locked. It was boring, but that was fine by me. At least, until I started noticing the open doors. At first, I thought it was my own mistake. Maybe I hadn't checked them thoroughly. Maybe I had just assumed they were locked. But then, it kept happening. Every few nights, I'd do my round and find one of the office doors slightly ajar. The first time, it was the dentist's office. I knew for a fact I had locked it earlier. The second time, it was the law firm, then the publishing company. There was never any sign of forced entry, nothing missing, just an open door. I started double-checking, then triple-checking the locks at the start of my shift. I even started taking pictures with my phone to be sure. But no matter how careful I was, the doors still ended up open. Then the noises started. It was subtle at first, the sound of a chair scraping against the floor in an empty room, a quiet shuffle of footsteps when I knew I was the only one there. I'd checked the cameras, but they never showed anything, just empty hallways. One night, I heard something different. A whisper. It was so faint I almost thought I imagined it. But then, I heard it again, just a single word, too soft to make out. It came from the end of the hall near the stairwell. I should have left. I should have called the police. But I told myself it was nothing, that I was tired, my mind playing tricks on me. Then I saw him. I was making my final round for the night, walking past the publishing company's office, when I noticed movement through the glass door. My breath caught in my throat. Someone was inside. I could barely make out his shape in the dim light, but he was tall, thin, standing unnaturally still. My heart pounded as I fumbled for my keys, ready to lock the door from the outside. But when I looked back up, he was gone. I didn't hear him move. He was just not there anymore. I unlocked the door, flicked on the lights, and searched every corner of that office. Nothing. No signs of forced entry, no open windows, no way for him to have gotten out without me seeing. I tried to tell myself it was stress, lack of sleep. Maybe I was just seeing things. Until I checked the security footage. I rewound the tape, watching the hallway outside the office. There was no sign of him walking in, no sign of him leaving. But for exactly 7 minutes, the camera feed cut out completely. The next night, I quit. I don't care about the money. I don't care about the job. I don't even care if people think I'm crazy. Because as I was gathering my things, I noticed my locker was open. And inside, right on top of my things, was a single photograph. A grainy black and white picture of me, taken from inside the building, from the end of the hall, right where I had heard the whisper. I grew up in a small town, the kind of place where people don't lock their doors and everyone knows each other's business. That's what made what happened all the more terrifying, because when you think you know everyone, it's easy to let your guard down. I had just moved back after college, renting a small house on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much, but it was affordable, and I liked the quiet. I worked from home as a freelance editor, so I didn't have much reason to leave other than grocery runs and the occasional dinner with my parents. It was a simple life, predictable, until the noises started. The first time I heard it, I was in bed reading. A faint scratching sound. It was coming from outside, near the bedroom window. My first thought was raccoons. The house backed up to a wooded area, so it wasn't unusual to hear animals at night. Still, it set me on edge. I got up, turned on the porch light, and peeked outside. Nothing. Just the trees swaying in the wind. The next night, it happened again. Only this time it was louder, more deliberate, like something or someone was dragging something along the outside wall. I sat up in bed, heart hammering. I turned on every light in the house, but when I looked outside, I saw nothing. No footprints in the dirt. No signs of disturbance. I told myself I was being paranoid. Living alone in a rural area could do that to a person. But the third night shattered any illusion that this was just my imagination. I had just settled into bed when I heard it again, scratching, slow and deliberate, moving along the wall. But this time, it didn't stop. It moved from the bedroom window to the living room, then to the front door. I grabbed my phone, ready to call the police. But before I could dial, my motion sensor light flicked on. I held my breath, watching the shadows shift under the glow of the porch light. And then I saw it. A figure standing at the edge of the yard, just beyond the reach of the light. I couldn't make out any details, just the shape of a person watching. I called the police. By the time they arrived, the figure was gone. They found nothing, no footprints, no signs of forced entry, just me, shaken and barely able to explain what I had seen. For a while, things were quiet. I started sleeping with a baseball bat by my bed and checking the locks twice before I went to sleep. But a week later, something far worse happened. I woke up to the sound of my front door unlocking. My blood ran cold. I knew I had locked it. I knew it for a fact. But as I lay there, frozen in fear, I heard the slow creak of the door swinging open. I grabbed my phone and whispered to the 911 operator, barely breathing as I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving through my house. I stayed hidden, curled under my bed, listening as the footsteps moved through the living room, the kitchen, then down the hall toward my bedroom. The door creaked open, silence. Then I heard breathing, shallow, slow, right outside my bed. I squeezed my eyes shut, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would give me away. Then, footsteps, moving away, the front door opening, closing. When the police arrived, they found the door locked from the inside. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was out of place. But when they checked the security footage from my motion sensor camera, they found something that made my skin crawl. At 3:47 a.m., the camera had captured a man standing at my front door. He wasn't trying to break in. He wasn't fiddling with the lock. He was holding up a key. My key. I moved out the next day. I never found out how he got it. I don't think I ever want to. I grew up in a small town where everyone knew each other, or at least thought they did. I was the quiet kid, the one who blended into the background, never caused trouble, never got into fights, never did anything worth remembering. That's probably why, when it all started, no one really noticed. I work in maintenance, mostly building repairs, plumbing, and electrical work. It's not glamorous, but it pays well enough to keep me in a small apartment and my fridge stocked. My job takes me into a lot of dark places, crawl spaces, abandoned buildings, old basements that haven't seen a visitor in decades. I used to think the worst part was the rats. I was wrong. The first time I felt it, I was working on a house on the edge of town. It had been empty for years, and the new owners wanted to renovate before moving in. I was down in the basement replacing some old pipes when I got the distinct feeling that I wasn't alone. It wasn't just paranoia. I know what that feels like. This was different. It was like the air had thickened, pressing in on me from all sides. I turned around so fast I nearly knocked over my toolbox. Nothing. Just old stone walls, damp from years of neglect. But the feeling didn't go away. If anything, it got worse. It was like something was standing just out of sight, watching me. I chalked it up to an overactive imagination and finished the job as quickly as possible, eager to get back above ground. A few nights later, I woke up to a noise in my apartment, a shuffling sound like someone dragging their feet across the floor. My heart pounded as I sat up, straining to hear. I live alone, and I always lock my doors. But this noise was inside. I reached for the baseball bat I kept beside my bed and crept toward the sound. It was coming from the living room. I flicked on the light, but the room was empty. The only thing out of place was the closet door. It was open just a crack. I know for a fact that I had closed it before going to bed. I walked toward it slowly, gripping the bat so tight my knuckles turned white. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. With one swift motion, I yanked the door open. Nothing, just coats and an old vacuum cleaner. But the air inside the closet was freezing, far colder than the rest of the apartment. I barely slept that night. Things escalated after that. I started waking up with scratches on my arms, long, thin marks like something with sharp fingers had been reaching for me in my sleep. Objects moved on their own. Once, I set my phone on the kitchen counter, turned away for a second, and when I looked back, it was on the floor, screen shattered. It hadn't fallen. It had been placed there. The worst part, though, was the dreams. They started as flashes, dark hallways, distant whispers, something lurking just beyond my field of vision. But over time, they became more vivid, more real. I would wake up gasping for air, drenched in sweat, convinced that I wasn't alone in the room. And then I saw it. It was a week ago. I had come home late from a job and was too exhausted to do anything but collapse onto my bed. Sometime in the middle of the night, I stirred half awake and realized I couldn't move. Sleep paralysis. It wasn't the first time I'd experienced it, but this was different. I felt a weight on my chest, heavy and suffocating. My breath came in short, panicked gasps. And then, in the corner of my room, something shifted. It was a shadow at first, darker than the rest of the room, a void where light should have been. Then it moved. Long, thin limbs, jagged movements, like it was learning how to walk. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel it watching me. And then it whispered my name. My real name. The one I never tell anyone. I broke free from the paralysis with a gasp, sitting up so fast I nearly fell off the bed. The room was empty, but I knew, deep down, that it had been real. Now, I don't sleep much. I leave the lights on. I keep the baseball bat close. But every night, I still feel it watching, waiting. And I know, one day soon, it's going to do more than just watch.